A daycare worker caught on surveillance video repeatedly kicking toddlers? Well, she's expected to spend time in prison after pleading guilty. More than 100 incidents were caught on camera. We are taking a look at what her sentence could be and the steps that can be taken to make sure our children are safer in daycare environments. And we're going to do that with an expert in daycare injury litigation. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. A woman in Lindale, Texas was expected to care for multiple children at a local daycare, but instead, she was caught on camera kicking those children again and again and again, coming up behind them and kicking them in the back. I wish I was making it up, but I am not. We first told you about 45-year-old Catherine Guzieska last fall. She worked at Pumpkin Doodles Daycare in Lindale. Another daycare employee was checking security tapes when they allegedly spotted Guzieska kicking a 2-year-old child in the small of their back. This boy apparently cried out, grabbed his back where she'd struck them. According to an arrest warrant that was reviewed by KLTV, that other daycare employee called the boy's father and reported what happened. He then got in touch with the Smith County Sheriff's Office on October 23, 2024. So investigators, they reviewed more of Pumpkin Doodle surveillance footage, and they found that this woman, Guzieska, kicked 6 toddlers on 134 separate occasions. And by the way, that's not all. Several videos reportedly showed her walking around during nap time and aggressively moving various toddlers, pulling some of them from their beds and dragging them by their arms to a changing table. This is according to court documents. In videos that showed a changing table, Guzieska reportedly put the children on the table so aggressively, pushing their heads and forcing them to stare at the wall instead of in the direction of a TV. She's even accused of standing on children's hands to punish them. One video allegedly showed her standing on a toddler's hand for several seconds while the child tried to get away. Now, deputies, they reviewed these videos and they said the children, they weren't acting out in any way. They weren't being disruptive when the daycare worker hurt them. Not that that would even matter. But the sheriff's office said in the affidavit it was apparent that Guzieska, that her actions were random, intentional, unprovoked, violent in nature, and done for the sole intent of inflicting pain. And Guzieska hadn't been at that daycare all that long. The former owner of the daycare, Melanie Dawn Law, spoke with KLTV and said that the woman was originally hired in September of 2023 and that the assaults happened between July and October in 2024. She says she fired Guzieska the day the abuse was exposed. And according to reporting, she passed a background check and had all the required training and qualifications to work with young children. She reportedly said, "To think someone I hired and trusted could harm innocent children in this way is beyond comprehension." Guzieska was arrested and charged with 2 counts of injury to a child with the intent to cause bodily harm. More of those same felony charges were later tacked on, bringing the total to 6. She was held on a $450,000 bond, which it appears she was never able to post. And Law said that she planned to sell the daycare, that it would reopen under new ownership with a new name. And then we go to Tuesday, September 16th. And this is when Guzieska entered a guilty plea in Smith County Court. Now, based on the Texas criminal sentencing guidelines, Guzieska could face a wide range of prison sentences. KLTV reports that her defense attorneys are asking for a 10-year sentence on each charge, which, kind of sounds like a lot, but they want those sentences served concurrently, so at the same time. Now, you might think by watching Sidebar, you've seen it all. Let me tell you, think again. 50 Ways to Catch a Killer brings you real cases where detectives had to flip the script to take down cold-blooded killers. Hosted by 50 Cent, this isn't your typical crime show, okay? It's a high-stakes, twist-filled ride into the minds of investigators who think outside the badge to break the case. From unforgettable setups to shocking reveals, every episode proves when killers think they got away with murder, think again. Watch 50 Ways to Catch a Killer with 50 Cent exclusively on Fox Nation. Now, to talk about all this, I want to bring back on Russell Button, who is a daycare injury attorney out in Texas. Unfortunately, deals with a lot of these cases often. Russell, it's really good to see you again because you've been following this case with us for the past year. I guess we could start here. It's good to see some sort of resolution in this case, pleading guilty. Why do you think that happened?
You know, Jesse, we've been following this case since you had us on last December. And I am grateful that they finally pled guilty. Okay. And I think a lot of it had to do with the significance that this got out there in the press. I think that's part of it. And it brought to light some of these issues that we see time and time again in our cases. Now, one of the most important parts about why this was pled to and why this criminal is finally going to get sentenced for what she did to these children, it's largely because this should never happen, and they know it, and there's no way out of it on this one.
No, no. Okay, let's talk about that. No way out of it. I'm sensing significant prison time here. The defense, though, what they're asking for is interesting. They're asking for, our understanding, 10 years on each of the 6 charges, but serving them concurrently at the same time. So I guess, 10 years in total. What is your reaction to that recommendation?
Well, first off, Jesse, I'm just grateful that the district attorney and they're taking this seriously criminally, because I'll say far too often on these abuse cases, we see criminal charges not getting brought, and so I'm very grateful that that happened here. So as far as the 10 years per each count of the 6 counts for a total of 60, but they're all going to be served at the same time. In my opinion, concurrent sentences in this sort of scenario, it doesn't reflect the severity of what happened here. I mean, plain and simple. This was not a one-time mistake. I mean, that's clear. 134 different instances of abuse spread out over months and months of time with multiple different children. This was an adult who intentionally harmed toddlers. And each of those children and each of those assaults deserves to be recognized individually, in our opinion. Serving that all that amount of time at once, it minimizes the weight of the crimes individually, in our opinion, and fails to account for the repeated harm that these families had to endure.
What do you think the court's going to do?
The court is going to make their own decision, no matter what each side of the attorneys recommend. Attorneys can come up with a deal on both sides, the prosecutor and the defense, and the judge is going to make their own determination, weighing the severity of what happened in conjunction with the crimes. And I hope the judge just understands our position as daycare and child injury lawyers and what we see on these daycare abuse cases time and time again. And I hope they take that into their consideration when they're making the right decision for the community.
Here's the thing about this, right? I wonder if she pled guilty because there was absolutely no defense. What would the defense have been? It's one thing to say someone's babysitting and there's bruises and the parents accuse the babysitter of abuse, but there's no surveillance footage, there's no cell phone footage, there's no text messages. It's just the words of the parent, and the word against the words of a babysitter or caretaker. This is very well documented. Was there any defense?
I couldn't think of one. I mean, to be honest with you, and we talked about this, last time you had us on at the very outset before all this actually fully got developed and came to light. There is no defense to this, and there shouldn't be a defense to abusing children, and repeatedly abusing children. Thankfully, there was surveillance footage that was preserved, not just recorded, but actually preserved, and being able to be watched over. And you said it. In certain circumstances, we see this in daycares when there isn't surveillance footage and nobody wants to talk about what they saw or what they've witnessed. And far too often, this abuse just goes unrecognized, and nothing is done about it. And then we see something worse happen later on. And in this case, why wasn't this brought to light sooner? Why did it have to get to this point? Is one of the big questions that we would like to see answered at some point in this case.
And going back to something, are daycare facilities required to have security cameras? And if they are, is there a minimum to how often that video should be reviewed?
This is the biggest thing in our cases that we see, Jesse, and at it very much at light in this case here. This case here, it's very clear that the surveillance cameras, they can't protect children alone, right? Someone needs to actually be monitoring them. It goes back to the old adage, what good is it if you don't use them? Now, they're great for after the fact, which is great for this criminal case, as evidenced here, and any civil cases that would follow, and should serve as a deterrent to caregivers to not do these bad things to kids. But these kids suffered again and again because no one at the daycare was reviewing the footage regularly. Right now, Texas does not require daycare centers to have cameras. And there are no regulations about how often the footage should be checked. We are actively advocating and working for all daycares to be required to have surveillance footage, and to make that surveillance footage recorded. And on top of that, it's just normal supervision of a daycare when they do have cameras. No matter what they are, they should be regularly checked throughout the day, Jesse, to answer your question on that. Now, we don't expect somebody to necessarily just be sitting there looking at the camera all day long, but there shouldn't be an opportunity for a caregiver to be alone with kids without being viewed and supervised to allow them to abuse kids over 134 times over several months.
But it also indicates something else, that based on the reporting, when the other employee called a toddler's father about what she saw on the camera, it was the parent who got in touch with law enforcement, though the daycare owner told deputies that she contacted Child Protective Services and law enforcement when she learned about what happened. So it goes into this idea of what falls under mandatory reporting for daycare workers. How do you differentiate between what might be an internal issue dealing with things like retraining versus criminal behavior?
Yeah, it's everything here. Texas law is very clear. Daycare workers and everyone that works at a daycare is a mandatory reporter in Texas. They are required to report suspected abuse immediately to the state and to law enforcement. You see something, you got to say something. Simple, end of story, point blank and period. Okay. This daycare and all of their workers and the director and owner, they failed these families at every turn by not taking immediate action when they first saw something of suspected abuse, even, Jesse. They don't even have to actually have seen what they would term as abuse. It's suspected abuse. And we see this in physical abuse and sexual abuse cases all the time. We have active cases where this is a big thing. And you hit on the training aspect of this. These daycares must be training on what is a reportable offense that happens at daycare. And we see that caregivers, when we take their depositions all the time, had no idea that what they saw, what they witnessed, what they verbally told management, what management even knew, was supposed to be reported. And it just is alarming because a lot of these things could have been stopped right away and a lot earlier than going on for months at a time. This responsibility, though, Jesse, is not optional. The law is, like I said, is clear on that. It is not an option to choose whether or not you report. And the fact that a parent had to be told something by a worker and the parent was the one who reports is just devastating for all the other things out there that don't get reported. That's what's alarming about this.
I want to be clear about something. The fact that Guzieska has pleaded guilty, and yes, this is a big story. We've tried to amplify it here on Sidebar, bring awareness to it, bring awareness to what might be going on in other states, in other families. But if she ever tried to work at a daycare in the future, in a different state, let's say she gets 10 years, comes out, she has to be flagged on a background check, right? I just want to be clear. Do you see any avenue by which she could be caring for children again? Again, assuming someone hasn't heard this story, hasn't followed the news, is there any avenue that she is going to be taking care of children again?
I sure hope not. And any daycare that does choose to hire her is immediately grossly negligent, knowing what is out there, what they should know that is out there. That would show up on a simple Google search, would show up on a background check, and would just show up in checking prior references. So to answer your specific question about this, can she? We see daycares all the time that skip a background check, don't do a thorough one, don't do reference checks, don't just do a simple Google search, and they hire people that are known sex offenders. They hire people with known criminal histories, documented criminal histories, both with fraud with harming children, with aggressive, violent pasts, and prior abuse findings. We see this time and time again. It shouldn't happen. It's not supposed to happen, but it does happen when daycares choose to cut corners. So the important thing is there are rules that daycares are supposed to follow. They're supposed to search for a criminal history check, sex offender registry entries, and prior abuse and neglect findings. They're supposed to check references. But the daycare must actually complete those steps without cutting corners. So she shouldn't be able to work again. But that's not to say that a daycare wouldn't do that. But I sure heck I hope she's not going to be around kids.
That is such a scary thought. And one other thing kind of struck me if we're talking about scary things to process. In your experience, had she not been caught, could this abuse have escalated to unimaginable levels?
Just based on what we know, absolutely. When people we've seen in these cases that are caregivers, that are directors, that are around kids, and they have it in them to do this to a child who can't fight for themselves, who can't speak for themselves. Even these were 2-year-olds. I mean, to put your hands on a child in a violent and aggressive manner at that age and do these things to those kids, those are not people that knowingly take themselves out of that situation and say, you know what, I'm just not meant to be around kids. They're going to keep doing it until somebody tells them and puts them away and says, no, this is not acceptable, and hold them fully accountable and everyone around them that allowed it to happen. Why do these things keep going on for months and months and months and multiple hundreds of incidents? So could this have escalated? Could it have even gotten worse than this? And would it have continued to go until somebody finally put a stop to it, or something really, really tragic happened and a child had catastrophic injuries or was unfortunately killed, which we've seen in these cases? The answer to that is yes, it would have gone on until it was stopped. Thankfully, that parent reported it.
Yeah, there's something you mentioned about the age, 2 years old. I mean, you can't get more defenseless or vulnerable. But fortunately, they came away with just, minor to medium bruising. I say just, but it's awful. But it could have been worse. This is according to the Smith County Sheriff. Do you think that these children will have any memory of what happened to them? What impact you wonder the abuse could have on their emotional or mental development? I mean, you're an attorney where we talk a lot about what is the harm, what is the damage. When we talk about lawsuits, talk to me about what, in your experience, you see happen to children who are abused at a young age.
Yeah, these kids know it. They know that this stuff is going on, and they absolutely will be affected by it. We see short-term impacts, and we see long-term impacts with repeated instances of abuse and serious abuse cases. No doubt about it. They will immediately see differences in their children. Well, each child is different. I will say that each child is different. But we see everything from nightmares and night terrors to sleep issues to regression in their developmental milestones all the time, trust issues, fear of those that were put into a position of authority around them as they grow up and develop. So it's going to affect them in the short term, and that time of their life between 1 and 5 is the most critical age of development for our youth and for the children. And so scientifically, we see this with abuse stuff at those ages, and the literature and the science, and what we see firsthand with these families and on our cases is very clear. These kids will absolutely need ongoing help and support to process their experiences and move forward in a healthy way. And they're going to get over it. Some of them will get over it, and others it will affect them forever in various ways that they'll never necessarily be able to firsthand know why they're acting this way, but the parents and everybody else will absolutely know it.
You mentioned cases. Let's end here. Do the parents of these children have legal recourse against the daycare? If so, what does that look like?
Yeah, that was something we had discussed back last time in December. There are 3 aspects to all daycare injury cases, okay, and abuse cases. The first one, obviously, that you have is the state investigation here, THHS, DFPS. And that's where they go and they look at the administrative aspect of what was the requirements of this daycare and did they have any violations. That was done here. Then you have the criminal aspect for anything that's a criminal act, which is in the process of concluding here, thankfully. And the third prong of all these cases is the civil prong. And that's where the actual victims and the families, they have a voice to hold the daycare accountable for negligence and gross negligence. But also the damages get brought to light. Different questions get answered in those cases, and they get held civilly liable. And that three-prong approach is absolutely legitimate here. It's valid here, and each of these families has a claim if they won it, a civil case, that will look into and pull the evidence of, was this a qualified caregiver? Were they trained? Were they supervised? All the answers to which we understand now is the answer is no. And were these kids damaged? And that's specific to each family and their children. Were there damages, and was there gross negligence, right? Was this reckless behavior? And absolutely it was. So yes, there are civil cases available for these families, just like they are in every case where there's a daycare injury or abuse or a death at a daycare involving a child. Those are significant parts of the full picture of holding the daycare accountable, because the daycare is the system, Jesse, and that's one of the most important things is the one bad apple of a caregiver isn't going to stop a problem if the whole system as a whole is allowing these things to continue to go on. And that's really what we focus on in our cases, on these civil cases, is we want to make sure to get to the root cause. So that way we can determine how it happened and to prevent it from ever happening again. And that's our parents' number one things when they call us. How can we hold them accountable to make sure that this doesn't happen to another child, what happened to mine? And that is available here.
That's an important point, and that's the point I want to leave on. Russell Button, thank you so much for coming on, and thank you so much for the work that you do. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jesse. Appreciate you.
And that is all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow me on X or Instagram. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll see you next time.